Hey, so this is part 2 of downloading Rust, creating a Rust program, compiling it and running it. And so this is for the Windows operating system, and I'm going to be using the command line. There's other systems you can do it for. You can obviously download Rust on Mac, and you can use the command line on Mac, which is called Terminal, and you can use an IDE for either Windows or Mac, like Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio, various ones, but I'm not going to use any of those IDEs. I'm going to keep it really simple. I think the simpler the better when you're first learning. And so here it is. So in the last video we already downloaded Rust for Windows and then we restarted the computer. So now in the second video I'm going to first check that it was downloaded and installed correctly. So I'm going to say rust c version. There it is. So there's the version of Rust I have installed. And I'm going to also just check cargo version. Okay, so cargo is installed. Cool. CLS clears the screen in Windows command prompt. So I'm actually going to CD onto my desktop. So that's where I want to be. Command line is just like clicking around with your mouse on your desktop, except you see everything in text instead of graphical user interface. So I'm going to see what's on my desktop and do that. I say dir, and so then here's a bunch of files. I do have a Rust file on this desktop. Just ignore that, pretend like it's not there, because that's for a later video I'm going to make on variables, but just pretend like that's not there. It doesn't really matter for this. First thing I'm going to do when I want to create a Rust program is create a file. Just like when you write a paper, the first thing you do is create a new Word document or Notepad or whatever thing. I'm going to use actually Notepad to code. It's one of my favorite thing to code in, actually. And there's different ways to create files. I mean, you could just say echo and then like the file name .rs. You could do copy con, I think, file name in DOS and do that. But the way I like to do it is say Notepad, and I'm going to say call this one good old hello world.rs. .rs is the file extension for Rust source code files that you should use. And I'm going to say just like a txt notepad file will have .txt or Word will have .doc, Rust source files have .rs. And actually, I think, so for Unix, your file extensions don't matter. They're really more for the programmer, and I think that's the case in Windows too, but I'm not totally sure how DOS and Windows actually work in that regard. But in any case, you should just put .rs because that's what tells you, the programmer, that that's a Rust source file. So I'm going to create it by pressing enter. So now that file doesn't create, isn't there yet. If it was there, it would open it up, but since it's not there, it's asking me if I want to create it. So yeah. So there's hello world file, nothing in it. So every Rust program needs a main function. So I'm going to say fn main, little parentheses telling you it's a function. It can take some arguments. Nothing in the arguments yet. If they were, it would be passed in through the command line. I would pass in through some arguments when I ran that program. I would pass through some arguments via the command line, and they would go on into this program. And arguments meaning some bits of information, maybe a number, a string, a letter, whatever. Anything I want to pass into this program, they come through those parentheses, but I'm not going to pass anything, not going to get that complicated yet. So curly brace, 1, 2, 3, 4. How many spaces I do? 1, 2, 3, 4. No tabs in Rust, do spaces. And I'm just going to print something in this. Print line, it's a macro, it's called a macro in this language. And I'm going to say hello world, this is my first Rust program. And then I'm going to close it. So this Rust is a curly brace semicolon language like Java and C++, meaning that it uses curly braces and semicolons to indicate blocks of code and the end of a statement. Other languages use colons and indentations like Python, but this one uses semicolons and curly braces and indentations too, but the indentation here doesn't matter. So yeah, that's the whole program right there. We're going to save it, close it, Now I'm going to compile it, meaning I'm going to turn that high-level language, meaning the actual code I just wrote, I'm going to turn that into ultimately a bunch of ones and zeros. It doesn't turn into ones, it turns into an executable file. And that is ultimately converted into a bunch of ones and zeros because that's all a processor can understand. And every processor is different, so well, unless it's the same model, so that's why you compile the program. First, there's other ways to compile and run in the same step, but for this video, we're just compiling it using the Rust language, not Cargo. And you can use Cargo to do stuff too, but we're just use Rust. So you say rust c hello world.rs. So that compiled just fine, no errors or anything. And then I'm going to run that executable. It actually creates an executable file, meaning a file that will actually run. And you can see that on my desktop. If I say dir, it shows me what's on my desktop, and it's right here, hello world.exe. It also created hello world.pdb. We don't need to know about that right now, not important. And again, forget that this is here. Doesn't matter. It's not affecting anything. So I'm gonna actually run the program now, and to do that, for Windows, you type something different than you would for Mac. For Windows, you type // and then you type the executable, hello world.exe. Sorry, hello world.exe. Run it. And there it is, hello world. This is my first Rust program. If I had just coded a calculator with a graphical user interface and I ran that executable, something like that would pop up, and then I could click on it. If I had just coded, something that told me a bunch of stock prices, then that would come up maybe under here or something. Or if I had a graphical user interface, then that user interface would come up. Whatever your program is, that's what gets executed right there. That's the final product. And that's the whole video. So I hope that was helpful. Next video will be on how to install Rust, create a file, compile it, and run it in a Mac type environment. Specifically, I'm going to be using Ubuntu, which is based on Unix, which is what Mac OS is based on. So I'm going to do it in Ubuntu because I don't have a Mac, and hopefully that'll be useful for Mac users because it's the same commands. That's it. Clear my screen, and that's the end of the video.